Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first episode of So You Want to Be an Architect. In this episode, we meet with experts in the community to talk about their real life experience and their day-to-day work and what is the thinking that goes behind the scenes when we build a solution for a client, or what type of thinking process we follow. And our guest today is the awesome Gregor. So, hello, Gregor. Thank you so much
Hi.
for being my first guest.
You're very
I really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Nice to be here.
Thank you, mate. Yeah. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you become an architect?
Yeah, cool. So hi everyone, my name is Gregor Sutti. I am an Azure Architect for a company called Intercept in the Netherlands. So I work remotely. So I get to sit in my house and work remotely all day, which is great. I'm an Azure Architect. I am an Azure MVP for 5 years, and I'm also an MCT.
Nice.
So how did I become an Azure Architect? So if I go all the way back to college and school, I left school, had no idea what I wanted to do. Kind of one of my best friends said, "Do you want to go to college and do computing?" And I was like, "Let's do that." So I did that for 2 years. I did quite well at that, so that was good. Part of that, I got a wee
Nice.
part-time job. My college lecturer said, "You kind of know what you're doing. Would you like a part-time job?" And I was like, "Cool." Did that, and then the same friend said, "Do you want to go to uni and do a 1-year degree in media technology?" It was called. So it was all about networking and stuff like that. Did
Nice.
that, and then got into coding. So we learned Java using Notepad, believe it or not. So that was interesting. Yeah, we didn't even have editors back then.
Wow.
So we
That
did
would have
that.
been super hard.
Yeah, and then I applied for a junior developer role. So I was really lucky. I ended up in a place called Stirling, my very first
Nice.
job. And I was really lucky. I had a very nice lady who took me under her wing and taught me how to do coding properly. So she was a senior developer and I was 19, 20 or something like that. I think it was about 20.
Nice.
Had never written code professionally ever. So she took me under her wing and then I went from there. And then I moved on to, yeah, so I learned C# and, well, it was actually VB6. So I'm kind of showing my age. I'm 47 in case anybody wonders. So yeah, I learned VB.net and then kind of progressed to C#, moved to jobs in Glasgow, loved it working there, and just became a developer and then a senior developer. And then in my last two roles, I was an SRE. I was like a site reliability engineer. And in my last role, I was a development manager. So kind of just through 10 or 15 years of career, just trying to get up the level and learn more and more. So
Beautiful.
the key for me is I want to learn. I want to learn everything. You obviously can't learn everything, but I want to learn as much as possible. If there's something new or there's something broken, shout on me and I'll try and help, even if I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
The also important part of that is I always like to network with people. So I think there's
Oh,
a
yeah,
big,
good on you.
yeah, I'm a big people networking. My big sister taught me that when I was younger. So
Yeah, I know that. Everybody
yeah,
in
I
the
like
Azure
to
community
know
knows
everything.
you.
Yeah, I like to know everything. The reason why I became an Azure Architect was I became an MVP first. So I started getting interested in that thanks to Kenny Lowe. He was kind of an MVP. I asked him all about it and he was like, "You should try and go for it." Didn't know much about it. Then I was working at JP Morgan. We were doing more .NET type stuff, all on-prem, and I wanted to start doing the cloud. So the cloud was starting to get quite big.
Yes.
They wanted to build their own internal cloud, which wasn't really, it was going to be like a 3, 4, 5 year project, and it was going to take forever. But I am a Microsoft fanboy. That's my that's my thing.
We all are.
Yeah. So I wanted to do Azure, so I started learning Azure while I was working at JP Morgan, and then through networking, I met Wesley, who still works at Intercept, and I met him at Ignite in 2019. Spoke to him, just bumped into him by accident. I don't think we even arranged to meet up. We just kind of bumped into each other, and I said to him, well, he said to me, if you're ever looking for a job, let me know. So I was like, okay. So about a year later, I reached out to him just when COVID hit. And then I became an Azure Architect there. I got a job interview at Intercept, and I didn't have a huge amount of Azure knowledge at that time. So
Right.
yeah, it wasn't really hands-on. It was more kind of doing the exams and trying to figure out what Azure is and then kind of do that. And then yeah, I started there and just jumped into the deep end and started doing designs and cost scans and all sorts of things for customers. So that's kind of how I got started at. And I've had quite a few people reach out to me the last 6 months to try and mentor them. And what's really interesting is they're all interested in becoming an architect. But like the girl I was talking to yesterday, she's just learning Python, and she's like, "How do I become an Azure architect?" So it's interesting we're having this discussion right now. Yeah, I think I'd always kind of planned and wanted to become an architect of sorts. Sorry, that's my team has just popped up. Yeah, I wanted to do that, and I'm now doing it, and I really love being an Azure architect.
Yep.
So yeah, day to day, everything changes. Like there's never the same day twice. That's what I really enjoy about my job.
Yeah. So actually, yeah, you touched on a very good and important point. That's one of the reasons that I'm starting this series, is that I want to meet experts like yourself, an architect in the community. It doesn't matter, by the way, if you are an Azure architect, a software architect, like a lot of people, like a cloud native architect, what is it, whatever. But I'm also getting similar questions. So someone like approached me like in a meetup or like in an event or like even on LinkedIn. I was like, what do I need to do? Or like, what does it take to become an architect? And then of course there are like the learning, which is an important part of life. There's the certification and all of that. But there is this missing link where this is what I feel like the thinking process. So like this, you get through experience, but it's really difficult to teach people. But it doesn't stop us from talking about it. So, for example, a client comes to your office, and then he's asking about like moving the data, or like he's asking about how to save on the cloud cost, or like they've got some workloads on in a private cloud or like on premises. They want to migrate to cloud. Those kind of thinking process. These are the this is what I hope to capture in this series. So what my question to you is, like on a day-to-day basis, say a client is coming to you to say like, could you please help me with saving some cost, or like I want to migrate data to a cloud provider, to Microsoft Azure. What type of question that crossed your mind, and like what is the thinking process that would help you like help the client succeed?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. It depends on what you're after, right? So I had a call today with a customer who's interested in like implementing a landing zone. So first of all, I always like to kind of introduce myself, get to know the two people that I'm talking to, and try and ask them what's the plan, what's the end goal, what does good look like? So if you can imagine, you fast forward 6 months or a year, where do you want to be? So they said to me, right, we'd like to be in Azure. We'd like to have subscriptions separate from production and dev test. So we want 3 separate subscriptions. They want governance in place. They want it to be secure. So they're starting off on a very good footing. They're asking about all the best practices. Now, a lot of this stuff you only gain from experience. A lot of these things you don't really think about when you're starting off. But I always like to think, if I'm learning any new language, say I was learning Python, right? I don't dive straight into it. I kind of want to know, what does good look like? How do you do things properly? And that's quite difficult without experience. So networking with people and asking lots of good questions. ChatGPT will tell you the answer, but it doesn't tell you sometimes why. So I'm always trying to say to the customer, what is it you want to do? What does good look like? And let's start from that point. And then I'll try and figure out what they need. So if it's things like, let's say a customer phones today and said, I want to move from on-prem SQL into Azure. I'm kind of like, right, what sort of size of databases is it? What kind of backups do you need? Do you want to keep the data in West Europe or Europe? What's your kind of data residency scenarios? Do you know, I'm trying to pick their brains so that they start thinking about things. So that's what I always do. I always try and pick their brains first and then get an idea in my head, right, these people, they might not know what they're doing, but you can try and guide them with like just talking to them and asking questions. So I'll start with that.
That's actually a really great question, because that's also one other question that I also use myself, which is like, what is, in an ideal world, what is it going to look like if everything went smoothing and stars are aligned? What is it, the end goal? And then that immediately helps the client actually tell you about what is that they've got in their mind, and then how do you go there? Like that's a very good point that you mentioned, knowing about best practices. So, for example, Microsoft has refreshed their well-architected framework documentation, and I see it, and it's really beautiful. And I think that's actually when you're starting to do, like when you started to learn about Microsoft technology, when you start to learn about, to go through the Azure fundamentals or like the Azure Solution Architect, a lot of the time there's a lot of information about like backup, a lot of information about like the storage, a lot of information about redundancy. How do you make sure that your environment is secure? It might sound it might sound like, okay, yeah, these information are all useful, but where is the exciting stuff? But actually, these are the questions. These are the questions that you will be asking your clients day in and day out. The client will be coming, and yes, there is this exciting, like the landing zone is exciting, and then Kubernetes and all those technologies are exciting in their own. But one of the important questions to the client is like, how are we going to make sure that his environment is always available? How do we make sure that if something happens, can they go back to their backup? How do they access those kind of like, how do they access these data? So do you see do you see a lot of the clients or like some of the clients maybe coming in with a technology in mind, or do they normally come in with an end goal?
We've got a mixture, to be honest with you. Some people are already in Azure, and it's a bit of a mess, and we have to try and backtrack and kind of put best practices in then. That's kind of why like the customer I was speaking today, I said, let's get best practices in first. So I always like it when you can start with a brand new tenant or a brand new subscription. That's always quite nice. Now, that's not always the case. So some customers are just focused on technologies, and I was like, okay, do you understand this technology? Because a lot of people want to use technology that they don't really understand. They hear these buzzwords and it's like, oh, let's do this and let's do that. And I'm like, okay, maybe you should start off small with a proof of concept. That's usually a good start. Do you know what the end goal looks like? The things that always interest me is disaster recovery and backups and things like that, because people don't really want to talk about that. But when you do talk about it, they soon realize that it's quite costly to do. And a lot of our customers don't want to do it because they're small software companies, and it's not they don't want to do it, they can't afford to do it.
I know.
So they've got all the resources in a resource group in one region, and they're not willing to pay for disaster recovery to fail over to a different region, which is quite interesting. It's quite interesting as a business that they don't want to do that, but that's pretty common where I work and the customers that I speak to.
I think like if I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone learning, so from what I'm getting from you is that you need to learn, of course, about technology. You need to learn about how to build stuff, but at the same time, like let's say, for example, someone is like going through a project where they are like building a web app or connecting that web app to a database, and then learning all the technology in and out. It sounds like they should ask themselves, how is this going to help a client? Like if a client is coming to me and asking me about a web app solution, building a web app, let's say a client came to you and said like, I want to build a web app. What type of question would you have in mind, saying like, okay, what is it to you?
Yeah, normally I would ask them, what is it? Like what programming language is it? How do you want the data to flow? Do you have like a front end talking to a SQL Server database, or what kind of database are you using? Things like, what do you want to do for deploying? Like, I'm thinking about deployment slots. Do you want to be able to deploy the next version of the web app into a deployment slot and switch over? Because a lot of customers don't realize you can do things like that. There's a lot of quite powerful features in web apps and then function apps and things like that. And I try and pick their brains about what it is they're wanting to do. And see, I'm always asking, like, do you want to move to containers in the future? Is your application built for that? So we see a lot of customers who have apps that aren't ready. They want to go to AKS, but their apps aren't ready for it. So I like to pick their brains and say, right, is it a stateless application? Yes or no, that kind of thing. And basically work out, is it potentially something you could move to containers down the line and benefit from all the good stuff in containers? So I'm always asking them about, how does the web app run? technologies that you're using? Have you thought about these features? Have you thought about cost? So maybe you want to replace some code with some Azure functions, and then you can run it pretty much free in the middle tier and things like that. So there's lots of things to consider. Most people don't really consider, especially when they come from on-prem, they kind of hard code the web.config files in .NET and then they deploy it to the cloud and it doesn't work. So I'm asking them, how do you configure the database connection strings in the code so that, for example, if you want to fail over from West Europe to North Europe, do you update the connection strings? Will it handle all that? Do you know what I mean? I'm kind of picking their brains to say, have you thought about this kind of stuff? The other thing is, I see a lot of people deploying things like database updates using Redgate tools, for example, when they're updating the SQL. And I'm like, do you know how to do that? Does that work in Azure? You get lots of questions like that. How do we deploy that? How do we fail over if a region goes down? Lots of questions like that. I've been working recently with a customer who is in West Europe, almost. That's just where they are, but they want to move. They want to move premium customers to North Europe. So that's been really interesting because they want to fail over a whole solution.
Wow.
So what if you've never done that? It's actually really interesting when you start looking at it, because some resources can fail over really easily. Some resources is manual. You know what I mean? You've got to think about lots of things as an Azure architect. There's a lot to consider. The main things, the main things I always try are: is it secure? How much does it cost? They always ask you how much does it cost, and it's always like a guess, because you never really know until you've had it running for a couple of months. Make sure you put budgets in place. I've seen a lot of customers get horrible bills at the end of the month because someone's deployed Synapse and put some tutorials in, and it's cost people a lot of money. So that security, put security in play. I make them think about things like naming conventions. So if someone new joins their team, are they going to know what region the resource is in? Are they going to know what it is? So a lot of customers I've seen have horrible naming conventions, or have no naming conventions, and you're like this is a bit of a mess.
Even tagging policies.
Tagging. Yeah, I was talking to a guy today, and he's like, we've got tagging the environment, and I'm like, you should put in the cost center. You should put in who deployed it and when it was deployed, so you can tell if it was like, was it a DevOps pipeline? Was it manual? Was it Bicep or Terraform? That kind of thing. So there's lots to think about. The beautiful thing is what you mentioned earlier is the well-architected framework covers a lot of this stuff. It's really good about. There's a lot in it. Definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, it's a lot of experience that like when you first read it, it says like this is a lot of experience that Microsoft gained from actually running their own environment, and then a lot of experience that they gained from their clients and working for building solutions to their client. It's a great start, and then a lot of like it sounds easy. A lot of the things that we are talking about, because if you're telling someone, if you're thinking about becoming an architect, those are the things that you need to think about. It might sound easy, like thinking about naming, thinking about tagging policy. That's actually, it becomes really important when you are, when you're operating the environment, when you are trying to figure out, like who's accountable for this environment, who's building this, how much budget do they have. For example, maybe setting some sort of an alarm, like if the budget is, if you go over the budget, or like even setting up policies to enforce that if you want to build this like a specific workload, machine with a specific size need to be approved by X and Y, so that it will not cost not cost the enterprise a lot of money. All those learning is easily found in Microsoft documentation, and also like I said, and I really love that, is that they're willing to learn, and then the idea is that you're never going to get client and the client is like fully within your knowledge. There must be something that, for example, they might be talking about a SAP application, or they might be talking about an application that you've not worked on. It's not an issue if you, for two things. First of all, you need to learn, and then the second thing is that most of the time when I get a client who's talking about a technology that I might not be familiar with, is that you need to like think about it to the core concept. Like, okay, what is this application or technology is helping the client, and then go from there. And again, the final thing is that always when we are learning about technology, it's important to learn how to build stuff, how to understand technology in and out. But it's like, in the end, we need to ask ourselves a question, which is, how is this technology going to help the client? Or like what would be a client? For example, a lot of time, some vendors come and pitch us our tools, their tools, saying like, this tool is doing this and this tool is doing that. And one question that I ask is like, what is the ideal client for your tool? So they must have figured out that a client with that amount of workload will be able to save a lot of like money or time, or save their environment, make their environment more available. So then you would start to understand it's not just about learning this technology. It's about like, how are you going to use it with for your clients. And okay, one last thing I want to ask you before we jump out, which is I know that you talk a lot about cloud cost saving. So and you've I know that you talked about it multiple times, which is awesome. So, and I actually was listening to you talking to Nicholas the other day, and I was like, oh wow, that's actually really cool. So can you tell us some of the some of your the advice or the experiences that you've got when talking to clients who are coming to you, saying, can you help me save say a lot? It's not just about saving money. Like, how can you help me with my cloud costs? It's more about like, how do you manage it and so on.
Very good question. I've done this quite a lot. So we do cost scans for customers, and I always sneak in a little bit of security as well. It's actually amazing the amount of times I've spoke to customers who've been using Azure for a while, and they don't know about Azure Advisor. Like today, I was like, do you guys know anything about it? And then they're like, no. And I'm like, they've never even opened it. Now, I think when you go into the portal, it should be front and central. That should flash up. I think that should be like the mandatory homepage, because that and Defender for Cloud. To me, they're the two things that I mention to customers all day, every day. So if you want to save money and make your Azure life a lot easier, go into Azure Advisor. So for people who don't know, it's AI that runs in the background and monitors your usage of Azure. So for example, cost, it'll look at, if you're using virtual machines, for example, it'll spend 30 days in analyzing the usage of your VMs. And it'll tell you if the VMs are underutilized or overutilized, for example, and then it'll give you recommendations. So you'll get recommendation for things like your VMs are too large, you can scale them down. You'll get reservation recommendations, you'll get cost savings plans, and these are just two ways of basically reducing the cost. Like we've got a customer that I'm looking at just now, and their VMs are way too high, but they don't want to scale them back because it's a production. It's just a reason they want to keep them large, because it's production. They're worried that if they scale them down, and that's fine. But we put some reservations on some Linux VMs, for example, and it was like $4,000 a month down to like $900 a month, just by adding. So what you can do is you can buy a reservation, which is about $280, one-time thing for a year. You can put a 1-year reservation on it, add the hybrid benefit, and it goes down to like $900. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, we could save them. It's in the millions, this customer. So definitely check out Azure Advisor. You want to make sure your security score within that is above probably 80%. So you get a security score, which kind of gives you security recommendations. Definitely check that out. But also put Defender for Cloud on. So for people who don't know, all of Azure security tools are kind of focused into what's called Defender for Cloud. So you can even start a trial. But if you enable that, you get different sections. So you can go in and turn on what's called plans. So let's say, for example, you aren't doing containers at the moment, but you might be doing it in 6 months' time. You can go on, add the plan, and what will happen was it won't charge you anything until you start deploying containers. But what I always tell customers, turn all the plans on. You'll only get charged for what you've actually got. So if you've got servers and you turn on servers, it will charge you. If you've got Cosmos DB and you turn that on, but you don't use Cosmos DB, it won't charge you. But that's you future-proofing yourself.
Beautiful.
So you turn all that on, and you'll get all these security alerts, which you're not currently getting if you've not got Defender for Cloud on. And that means your environment could potentially be open to potential risks.
Yeah.
So two big things are The other thing I wanted to mention really quickly is you talked about the well-architected framework. In Azure Advisor, if you go to cost and then go to workbooks, there's a new thing coming out that's to do with scan your environment, and it compares it to what's best practice in the well-architected framework.
Oh,
so you
wow,
can
really?
run a scan and it'll kind of, it's brand new. I think it's like come out in the last couple of days, but it's it's in preview. I've not actually got it to work yet because I think I managed to break it, but you're going to be able to run a scan and it'll compare what the well-architected framework recommends and what you've currently got, and I'll give you potentially recommendations. So I like the way that's going. Yeah.
Wow. How super cool is that?
I've yet to see a customer environment where we can't save them money.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
The most interesting thing is reservations. People think it's just on virtual machines, but you can add reservations to like 50 different services. Do you know what I mean? You can save some serious money. Even things like managed disks. If you've got a premium managed disk, you can over a P10, I think it is, or I think it's maybe a P6 or something like that. You can save yourself some serious money.
Nice.
But the one thing I would always call out is in Azure Advisor, go to cost, go to workbooks, and there's a cost bit, and it'll give you a rundown of your entire environment.
Nice.
So it will give you recommendations on things like, do you have any public IPs that you've left unattached? Are there any disks unattached? Things that you would probably forget about and don't really see anywhere else.
Yes.
But this cost management workbook highlights it all, and I really like workbooks. I'm a big fan of them. So you can run a KQL query, which will say, go and get me all the virtual machines that are stopped or deallocated that you're still paying money for. Really, really nice. So I always show customers that kind of stuff. But there's more and more of these tools coming out, which are helping people save money.
Yeah. In the end, it's more about like two things. It's about like how do you help a client build a solution that meets their requirement? How do you and then of course with your skills and experience, you would understand like, okay, when we're talking about a highly available application, we really need to build redundancy. We need to make sure we do have disaster recovery. We need to and then like for an architect, you need to know the well-architected framework really well in and out, because there's a lot of hidden gems. There's a lot of knowledge and best practice there. And then the other side is like, how do you help a client which is in their day-to-day, in their operations. So the idea is that it's, first of all, helping a client build an environment in a well-architected solution or environment. Also making sure if they've already got something, how do you help shape their environment? And then finally, once like the environment is in a very good shape, things are all green, how do you help make their life easier when it comes to the operation, like making sure that your environment is secure, you're cost effective. Yeah, so that's actually that's super cool. So I learned a lot today.
There's also things like automation and things like that where you can use pipelines to deploy, and we do as infrastructure as code, so that if a customer, if you deploy the development environment, we've used PowerShell and Bicep, you can just change a couple of parameters and you can roll that exact same code out to the test environment, and you can basically blow it away and deploy it to a different region in like 5 minutes. So there's lots of things like that. The one thing I would say is I hadn't really done disaster recovery scenarios recently. So I basically took it upon myself to just use a subscription that I have, go and look at the docs, walk through the tutorials, and just try things like failover groups, business critical, because there's an awful lot to learn as an Azure architect. So sometimes it's just best to crack open the tools and deploy it and see what you can do.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I do all the time. If I want to learn something new, I've got my own subscription, and like you said, I go and then work on stuff. Yeah, so the best, like in the end, like if we are trying to help someone who's trying to become an architect, is that the first thing, you need to know the tools, you need to know the technology and understand that. And it does, like the well-architected framework or like even cloud adoption framework, all those documentation would help you a lot to get into the mindset of an architect. And that doesn't mean it might be super scary, because now we are telling the what is the word? A listener or viewer that you need to learn all of Azure. It's not that. It's like you need to learn the core concept. Like
Yes.
every environment needs to be cost effective. Every environment needs to be secure and efficient. And when we say like, how do we make your environment like efficient and performant? What does that mean? Does that mean like does that mean like how close your environment is to your client, like maybe using Azure Front Door if you've got globally distributed users. How and like the more like logic you have in your application, that as in like if you've got firewalls, if you've got a server that is talking to a database and so on and so forth, all that add up so that before a user get a response back, that all these steps needs to happen. So you need to think, how can you maybe minimize or like maybe use a past solution, because a past solution have got all these figured out to make sure that your user will get the best result out of their best experience out of their using your workload. Yeah, so that does not mean you need to learn every technology on Microsoft Azure. That is super hard.
Yeah, it's not possible. I don't like when I first started Intercept, my networking skills were like non-existent because I had a development background, so I could do all the development questions, and I've just learned as you go. So I think some people might be thinking, I'll never make it an architect because there's too much to know, but nobody knows everything. So focus on certain areas, and over time you'll learn other stuff. Like I didn't know landing zones until very recently, where I've had to deploy it and figure it all out. But it's really an interesting topic on its own. But yeah, you just need to learn as you go.
Yeah, I have. First of all, thank you so much for being our guest today. And I would love to have you even more in the future to talk maybe about a specific technology, or like maybe, for example, like Azure Landing Zone, or like Azure Database and so on. And yeah, so that was an awesome first episode. That's actually captured what I had in mind when we talk about how do you become an architect. And yeah, so thank you so much, Gregor. Really appreciate having you today on this episode. And yeah, see you soon.
Cheers, thanks.